Good morning all. Today I'm going to modify this board by cutting tracks and fitting wires. Now I've already cut the tracks actually. Here they are, 4 tracks cut on the top there and 1 track cut on the bottom. So all the modifications relate to this 16-pin connector, and that's because where this 16-pin connector connects to, I made different decisions about where the tracks should connect. So when I designed this board, I made some decisions about which signal should go to which pins on this connector. One side of this connector, incidentally, is grounded on every pin. That ensures that when the ribbon cable is connected to this, ground appears between each signal to act as a sort of screen. But I made those decisions, and then when I came to design this board, which has the mating connector here, I changed my mind about which signals should connect to which pins. And there are 7 of these boards, so I wouldn't want to modify these, but there's only 1 of this board. So modifying this is the solution to the problem, and that's what I'm going to do today. Now there are various ways to do these wire modifications. I could connect to what remains of these 4 top tracks. I can't actually wire to this connector because I'd have to connect to the underside and the plastic touches the board, so that's not going to work. So on this connector I will have to wire to the bottom pins, and that means that actually, to keep this thing simple, I might as well keep all my wires on the bottom and just run them out to pins on other various points of the circuit where they connect. And I could possibly drill holes and have wires coming up through the board and then connecting on the top, but I'm choosing not to do that. The connections are relatively straightforward. This one here just has to run up to this pin here, so I'm going to need a 2-pin header connected in there. These 4 go to this corner of this connector, a couple of pins over here, and these 2 run down to this socket here. So in order, for example, to connect these 2 wires to their new positions, which are further down this connector, I'm going to have to fit the socket for this chip, because if I don't, I'm going to have nothing under here to connect to my wire to. So let's get that socket in. So let's warm up the iron. Actually, I won't quite yet. I'll just select these. Now really, if I'm going to be ecological, I should use these little cut-offs. In fact, I think I might. And I've got 5 pins there, so I can use 4 of those. So let's take a chippy. It's the actual chippy that fits in that position, an LM1458 dual op amp. I can put my 4-way connector on one side and my 2 2s on the other. Now these tend to break with a little bit of flashing on one side, so I'm going to orient it so that that's not in the middle, because that'll hold both these connectors apart. Got sun coming in here. It's not on the bench, but it's higher up. I might have to close the blind. Right, now let's warm the iron up, ready to do some ironing, I suppose. That can go in that way around, although the direction doesn't really matter at the moment. All I want in here is the socket, so that I've got something to link my wires to when I start doing my wire mods. Right, let's clean the iron and glue this socket in place. Glue, obviously being a euphemism for soldering, it's not really gluing, is it? Let's get some of those soldered in while I'm balancing the board on my finger to hold that into place. The rest I can do with this down on the deck. Let's get the remaining 4 pins soldered in, and that's it. So I think now I'm ready to put the wire mods on, and as I say, I'm going to do all my wire mods on the underside, and to prevent the wires kind of lifting away from the board, I'm just going to put little dabs of UV glue on and then use a UV torch. Now I think I'm going to have to solder this in, because one of my wire links goes to this socket. I've quite enjoyed actually having these just a push fit, because they're kind of tight enough to make an electrical connection, but no longer can it be a push fit. that's going to have to be soldered. And that's fine, because the choice over whether or not this is RCA or any other type of connector has been made. It's RCA. Actually, I could have just soldered the one pin that I'm actually connecting, because only 2 of these 8 pins actually do anything. This one, which is ground, which is why it's being a pig to solder, because all the heat's disappearing into the ground plane, and that corner one there, which is signal. Now I've got to trim these down. I'm going to let the cutters ride up the sort of meniscus of solder, because if you cut too low, it can put pressure on, well, everything really. If you ride up, then that pressure doesn't get put on the joint. There we are, all cut down. Now this signal here comes from another board, the slew rate board, which has the 556 on it. Generates a very large, about 22 volts, square wave signal with variable pulse width. It's going to be moved up to this top pin, but actually I'm not sure I need that signal immediately. I can kind of fake that by just pulling it down to minus 12 volts and get the whole system working. So I think I might not bother with that one yet, and just do the 4 topside tracks, which all need to be moved down, not quite to the bottom, it's 1 up from the bottom. So I think I'll start with this one, which went to one of these pins. I can't quite remember which one. There's a good way of finding out, and that is to get another PCB, bare, unused, which I can just use as a reference. So that bottom one comes 1 up from the bottom on this connector and goes to that chip, pin 2. Let's do that one. So I'm going to use this wire. It's, I think, 0.7 millimeters solid core. I'm going to use solid core because it's going to give me less grief than stranded. Stranded, I'd have to worry about all the strands flailing out and all that sort of thing. So let's do solid core. I want to strip that end. I think I'll do that with the Wix strippers. Yeah, these ones, because I know that the very last hole on here works rather well with this wire, and I'm going to strip off really the tiniest amount of insulation, because when I heat this, that'll ride back a bit. And also I only need enough exposed copper, I assume this is, to just attach to the side of an IC socket pin, so that should be fine. I'm going to tin it though, because that'll make it easier to solder. And after tinning it, yes, you can see, got lots of contamination on there. You can see the insulation has drawn back a little bit, so possibly I might even cut that down, don't know. So I think I'm going to solder this to chip pin 2 first, and then I can bend it round, so it's just a case of touching it, and the solder that's on both the pin and the wire just coagulate, amalgamate, whatever amate. Bend that round to its destination, a bit tighter I think. Yes, maybe I'll keep this on the underside there. So now I'll cut that off to length. Oh, I do need to strip it, that's going to be tricky, isn't it? But let's cut that off to length, which will be there. Now I need to strip it and then solder it onto the second pin up on my connector. And stripping it now is difficult because there isn't much of it. If I lift that up, try and get it onto the end of here, is it going to fit? Yes, but how do I hold that back? Yes, it kind of worked. It all got a bit bent, but I think it's fine. So I've just got to reform it so that it sits flat. Tin that, tack it on. So let's do the tinning while it's still sticking up in the air. I'm going to get my iron really clean for this. Okay, that's tinned. I'm just going to touch that connector to sort of remake the solder joint. Right, now I've got to bend this into position, which means forming it round like that. Now I really want some fairly large pliers, fairly flat, to get this wire flat again. That looks about right. Then I can tack that on, bend this flat to the board, and put a little dab of glue on it. Don't need any solder, shouldn't need any solder for this. Now, do I want to lift that up so that it's on the underside of this connector? I think it makes sense. Can't get it anywhere near this row, of course. Okay, tack that on. The solders have joined together. That looks pretty neat. Should we have a close-up view? Now, really, this one's so short, it doesn't really need a dab of glue, but I'll do it anyway. Let's try and get that flat. So there are my joints, and I'm happy with those as my new routing for that particular signal. So a few more of those. But before I do, I'm just going to put the little glue dab on there, assuming my glue is still working. Squeeze out a little bit of glue. Oh, there it goes. So just let it run this side and also that side. I really want the tiniest amount just to hold that in place. This glue smells really good. Not that I'd eat it or anything, but it smells good. Now I've just realised that the next wire runs over to a pin on the opposite side, and I can't really route inside the chip now, so I think I'm going to come round. This I think is a resistor, that's a capacitor. I think it is. Yeah, resistor, capacitor. No, that didn't look quite right. Oh, it's these two. Yeah, that's right. Resistor and capacitor. So yes, I'll come off this next connection, right around through those two and onto whichever of these two pins it is. I can't remember. Should be able to find out. Not on this board, but on my spare PCB. Okay, so that was pin 2. This one is 3, 4, 5, 6. Pin 6 is my next track destination. So we tin the next wire. That has cooled down. Let's get that back up to 340. Okay, tin that. Just so there's a little sort of visible blob of solder on there. That gives me enough solder, so I don't need to hold the solder for the next joint. I just need to hold the wire up against my connector pin, tack that on, wait for it to join. Now I shouldn't have any problems with it touching the ground plane because that is all coated in solder resist. Okay, let's form this one round. It's got to come between the resistor and capacitor to pin 6, which actually is down there, but I think that'll be fine. That could go a little bit smaller, couldn't it? Chop that off. There, that's fine. Let's strip that and tin it. So I want to shape this so that it falls. I've got to bend this down as well. It falls into place on pin 6 while not getting anywhere near the pads for the capacitor and the resistor. So I think that's about right. I think that just needs a little bit more bending down so that it goes flat. Okay, let's tin that. Tinning it like so. Make sure there's a good blob on there. There's rather too much on the iron, but we'll go with it. And push that up against the pin, pin 6. Make the joint. Ah, yes, that's lying nice and flat, but I will still apply some glue. And it's, yeah, it's away. It's a bit close to that capacitor connection, but it's pretty much away from all the joints that I need to solder when I put those components in. So dab of glue on there. That's the second one done. A little close-up of all of that. You can even see the glue. I went a bit mad with the glue on that one, but anyway, it's glued down. So yes, that's 2 wires on. Now the next wire runs in a completely different direction. It's the next one up, and it runs over here to this 4016 CMOS analog switch, 14 pin chip, and it goes to pins 2 and 3, so I can pick either of those because they're actually linked there. So pins 2 and 3 there, over to the next pin on the connector. Looks like that might be a fairly straight run. Just want to take kinks out of this, so I'm just going to bend it with an ever decreasing radius, like so. That's relatively straight. Yeah, it's going to be pretty much a straight run, I think. Let's get this one tinned. That's a bit mucky. Let's clean that up. Oh, there's a bit sticking out. Yuck. Okay. Tin that. Oh, nice micro blob on there. I'm liking that. Do you want to see the micro blob in close-up? Well, there it is. There's the micro blob. Perfect. Let's get that on. So, attaching it to pin 2 of this chip. And I'll go on the side of pin 2 that's near pin 3, knowing that they're actually joined together. Ooh, messy. That's on there. That runs relatively straight, but I'm going to put a small radius on it to avoid this socket. Over to here. Let's cut that to length. This is going to be a bit easier to... I'm going to cut it this way around so that I'm cutting with the flush side of the cutters. Yeah, this one's going to be a bit easier to strip because I've got a bit more length on it. It's all looking quite neat. Yeah, when I was stripping that, it all got a bit sort of bent and twisted, so I'm just going to do a few pulls here to try and reshape it so it's all nice and straight again. Oh, that is perfect dimensions. Let's get that tinned. And now solder it down onto its respective pin. I might as well be consistent with the side of the pins that I'm using. That's joined. Am I happy with that amount of solder? Yeah, I think I am. This isn't sitting quite flat, so I'm going to have to slightly reshape that. I'm not entirely sure how to get that completely flat to the board. Possibly, yeah, because there's not much wiggle room there now. Probably put the blob of glue on and then just sit something on there. Something with a bit of weight. It's only 0.5 mil off the board. Of course, it's just occurred to me that I haven't actually UV'd the glue that I put on these 2 tracks. Oh, what's that that's shining in the light? I think it's where I scraped the board. I'll come at that from both angles to set that. So what I can do is I can hold this down even with my fingers after I put the glue on it. No, that's not going to work, is it? I need something to hold it while I UV it. Don't really want to UV my fingers. So, blob of glue. Just in the middle probably. Around here. Get it on both sides. And then while that's still liquid, I'll hold this wire down with my screwdriver and UV it. Shouldn't take long for the UV to go off. And that's it. It's held in place. Right, the next one's really short. It is the next one up on here. I can't quite work out which one it is at the moment. Well, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's this one. And it just goes across to here. So it's a very short link. And it literally goes from this point over to this point. So that's a very short piece of wire. I might pre-cut that to length. I keep smelling that UV glue and it's just a fabulous smell. It's almost like gin or something like that. It's kind of, oh, there's a quite nice micro blob. Yeah, it's like gin and tonic or something. Right, so I want to cut this to length, I think, because it's going to be very difficult to strip the other end once this is anchored down. But it's a fiddly little piece to work with. Yeah, this is right fiddly. So that can go in there. And I just want to... it's quite difficult to strip it. Oh, that has stripped it. Yeah, good. So I can tin that. That's going to be hot in my fingers, isn't it? Well, let's see how we get on. But yeah, with that exposed end, it'll probably burn my fingers. Let's clean that up a bit. And try and go for a tin. Oh yeah, it's quite hot. But that looks pretty good. Nice micro blob at each end. Lovely. So I think a bit of tweezers manipulation for this piece. It is so tiny. Let's go on to the RCA socket first. That's melted. This hardly needs glue, does it? Now let's go on to the connector. Slightly angle this to bias the pressure. I think that's soldered. Shall we have a look at that to see what the joints look like? And there they all are in close-up. There's a little blemish on that wire. It got pinched or something happened to it. Not quite sure why. But I'm happy with all of those joints. The insulation has sort of melted back by different amounts. So it's not the most consistent. Now, do I need a piece of UV glue though? I really don't think I do for that tiny straight run. So no, I shan't bother. Well, I might as well solder the other side of this 8-pin connector for the RCA. No sense leaving that unsoldered. And then I can cut these pins down. No sense in having them sticking out like that, because they are quite long, because they're DuPont header pins kind of upside down. So cutting these off and trying to prevent them flying across the room. Ouch. Ouch. That hurts. They fly up with quite some force. And there it is. The board is fully wire modded on the underside. Yes, I'm very pleased with that, and I fitted a few more components. In fact, there aren't that many more components to go on here. There are a couple of Zener diodes here, which I can't find. I know I've got them somewhere, 5.1 volts. I just can't locate them at the moment. I'm having a big reorganization. They'll turn up. But yeah, that's starting to look pretty good. That one's still loose in its position, but I can solder that on. In any case, this board's going to go to a Rev 2 because I need a couple more outputs here. And the positions of these little link pins weren't really sort of thought out very well. They can probably move down into the board, and I'll use the space for a couple more of these RCAs. These two are inputs coming in from the preamps, but I need a couple of outputs. It should all fit on there without having to make the board any bigger and move stuff around. But yeah, I'm very pleased with that. Wire modded and almost complete. Cheerio.